I'm Evelyn Clarke, 62, and left to eat stew alone on New Year's Eve while my children celebrated in a hotel, so I wired my entire $250,000 nest egg into the adventure of a lifetime. Now they're about to find out I'm no one's cash cow. Before I begin my story, I just want to say thank you for listening to me pour my heart out. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me more than you know. Now let me tell you what really happened. I woke to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant boom of fireworks. My kitchen clock read 10 o'clock on New Year's Eve. I'd spent the afternoon simmering a simple beef stew, hoping its aroma might conjure a little warmth on such a cold night. Instead, I felt its warmth alone. My husband's photograph watched me from the mantel, his kind eyes captured in happier times, a reminder of laughter now gone. I ladled stew into my favorite ceramic bowl and carried it to the table, settling into the same chair I'd occupied for too many holidays without family. My spoon hovered over the first bite when my phone buzzed. I set the bowl down and picked it up. A group chat labeled Harborview 2025 glowed on the screen, and I felt a familiar pang. My daughter's name floated at the top next to my son's number. I opened the chat and read their message. Mom, we ran out of funds for the private bar tab at the hotel. Can you send over the transaction code for your credit card? My heart tightened. I remembered the countless times I'd covered their emergencies. Flat tires, overdue rent notices, surprise tuition top-ups. Every penny had come from my widow's pension or my 2 part-time jobs. Never once had I asked, "Why do you need more money?" until tonight. I placed my phone face down and closed my eyes. I tasted the salt in my stew more keenly and remembered the seamstress bill I'd paid out of pocket last spring, the new wheelchair ramp I had commissioned for the neighbor's front porch when she broke her hip. I thought of my own bills. Monthly insurance premiums, rising heating costs, new medications for my arthritic knees. My hands shook as I reached for the phone again. I tapped the screen and typed, "Call me first next time." I hit send and braced for the response. They replied almost immediately. My son's text read, "Are you serious? This is selfish. We're celebrating New Year's Eve together. You never want to spend on your own children." My daughter added, "Do you care about us at all, or are you saving every last dollar for yourself?" Their words stung deeper than any chill in the air. I set the phone aside and exhaled, the noise of fireworks like distant thunder through my window. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. The walls of my bungalow felt suddenly too close, the wallpaper too bright, the silence too deafening. I picked up my spoon and took a slow, deliberate bite. The stew was comforting and familiar. Each swallow reminded me that I still had something in me to nourish myself. Once I finished, I rose and crossed to the small bookshelf in the corner of the living room. I ran my fingers over its worn spines until I found the leather binder marked in neat script as the Clarke Trust. I had started this ledger the day my husband passed away, determined that whatever remained of his pension checks and all the tips I earned at O'Malley's Diner and as a home health aide would be meticulously tracked. The ledger was my silent partner, my quiet proof that I had not spent a single cent on anything but our utility bills, groceries, and mortgage. I opened the cover and flipped to the final page. $250,000 stared back at me in neat columns. Each entry was dated. A deposit of $250 on December 11th from a weekend of double shifts. A deposit of $1,700 on November 5th from overtime at the nursing agency. A deposit of $4,000 last year when I settled the medical bills for a neighbor after she fell. All my earnings kept safe. I traced the numbers with a fingertip and felt pride rise in my chest. This was mine. It belonged to me alone. I closed the ledger and held it to my heart, remembering the nights I spent balancing those figures instead of sleeping, the aches I ignored so that I could save a few more dollars. I thought of my children's bright faces on their birthdays, never once asking, "Where did this come from?" I had always been their provider. Tonight, they did not even wish me Happy New Year without expecting more money. I carried the ledger back to the kitchen, sliding it under a loose floorboard beneath my bed, my secret nest egg safe until the day I chose to spend it. I returned to the table and picked up my phone again. I considered their accusations of selfishness. I realized I would no longer accept that label. I had earned every cent with my labor and my faithfulness. If they could not see that, their loss would not be mine. I texted them one more time, a single sentence, "Happy New Year." I left the phone screen dark and face down on the table. I closed my eyes and breathed in the steam rising from my empty bowl. Outside, the fireworks crackled and faded, offering no comfort. But inside me something flickered, a spark of resolve. I rose and washed the dishes by hand. The sudsy water felt warm on my skin, and I allowed myself a small triumphant smile as I scrubbed away the last of my stew. I rinsed the bowl and placed it on the drying rack, pausing to glance at the silent television on its stand. I remembered a late-night infomercial I'd seen about lifetime cruises, the golden sunset over a boundless ocean, the promise of freedom and adventure. I'd laughed then, thinking it out of reach. Now I knew better. I returned to the living room and switched on the radio, tuning into a classical music station. The gentle notes of a string quartet filled the room, soothing the ache in my chest. I sank into my favorite armchair and closed my eyes, letting the music carry me to the memory of my honeymoon. My husband and I dancing by the shore under a blazing moon, dreams of our future bright in our eyes. The music lulled me into a quiet confidence. I would celebrate, but not the way my children expected. I would use my savings to forge a new path, one unbound by guilt or grudges. I would prove to myself that the sacrifices of the past did not chain me to their demands. I sat there, enveloped by the music and the fading celebrations beyond my window, and whispered to the empty room, "I will celebrate myself this year." I thought of the ledger beneath my bed, the vessel of my independence, and I smiled. Tomorrow I would begin to plan my own celebration. A voyage across the waves, a lifetime of voyages, each one mine and mine alone. I switched off the radio, turned out the kitchen light, and headed up the stairs. My slippers scuffed softly against the hardwood floor. I thought of my husband's words about cherishing moments. I thought of the ledger, the stew, and the phone call. I thought of the fireworks outside, their brief brilliance mirrored by the spark of strength inside me. As I slipped beneath the covers, I touched the loose floorboard where the ledger lay hidden and whispered, "Happy New Year, Evelyn. It's your turn now." The day outside ended, but a new chapter had just begun. I woke the next morning with the taste of cold stew still on my tongue and the echo of fireworks fading in my ears. My knees ached as I eased myself out of bed, a reminder of another year creeping up on me. I shuffled across the bedroom to the dresser and picked up my reading glasses. The ledger beneath the loose floorboard seemed to pulse with quiet promise. I slipped the tiny brass key into the lock on the bedside table drawer and lifted the floorboard, revealing the worn leather binder I'd labeled Clarke Trust. Its cover felt soft in my hands, corners bent from years of use, the pages inside full of the record of my life's work. I carried the binder to the kitchen, set it carefully on the table, and brewed a pot of strong black coffee. The early winter sun sifting through the curtains cast long, pale rectangles across the linoleum floor. I poured a mug and settled into my chair, leafing to the last page. The numbers printed there told the story of decades I had refused to squander. Deposits from my late husband's pension checks, the small bills I tucked away after lunch shifts in the diner, the heftier sums from home visits to a neighbor who paid me in cash for her husband's in-home care. Every entry was meticulously dated, every amount balanced against withdrawals for essentials paid in cash so that the savings remained untouched. The final line read exactly $150,000. I traced the numbers with my fingertip and felt the weight of each digit like coins in my palm. I had scraped and saved through nights of aching back muscles, charging Christmas gifts and birthday cakes on a card I paid off with tips, even when rent had doubled and holiday dinners had come out of my own pocket. I had watched my own health bills climb, new inhalers for my COPD, physical therapy for my creaking joints, and yet I refused to dip into this fund. It was my anchor, the one thing truly mine, and I had clung to it because after my husband died I was afraid there would be nothing left for me. Tonight, though, I held the ledger and realized that the ledger had carried me this far because I had been too afraid to spend it on myself. My children's message from last night flickered in my mind. They called me selfish for refusing to bankroll their celebrations, as if the money never represented the nights I'd been the one to stay late at the diner when it snowed, or the afternoons I'd skipped lunch to cover extra shifts. I thought of their laughter on last year's Christmas morning as they unwrapped gifts I'd bought with money I'd earmarked for heating repairs. They were never the ones who sacrificed, yet they had no qualms about demanding more when it suited them. They did not understand the ledger spoke not of greed but of years of small, unacknowledged battles to keep a roof over our heads and ensure they never missed an opportunity. I closed the ledger and rested it beside my coffee mug. I sat back, letting its presence settle around me like a comforter. I considered my 2 part-time jobs, one as a home health aide where I rose before dawn to help someone with dementia dress and eat, and the other at the local diner from late afternoon until closing. Those jobs had kept me busy and broke, but they had also kept me alive after I'd lost the man I loved. The pension checks started shortly after his funeral and they trickled in with perfect regularity, but the work I did on my own had doubled that amount, and I had written every cent in my ledger. If I chose to spend it now, there was no going back. I sipped my coffee and thought about the Endless Horizons Lifetime Pass cruise package I'd seen advertised on late-night television. A golden ship bow-cutting through sapphire seas. Endless ports of call. A lifetime of adventure without further cost. The tagline had been cliched, but it had struck me at the time as the kind of folly only other people could afford. What if I could afford it? If the ledger represented my freedom, perhaps it also represented my chance to truly live. I imagined the salt air on my face, the gentle roll of a vessel on a tranquil sea, the camaraderie of strangers becoming friends over dinner at a sunlit table. My heart fluttered at the thought. I finished my coffee, washed the mug, and then walked into the living room where my phone lay face down. I opened the group chat and read their last texts again. The consensus: I was a miser, a penny pincher, who didn't love them enough to celebrate with them. I stared at their words not for the first time and felt a flicker of sorrow and then anger. They would try to guilt-trip me again, but the ledger remained unflinching. I swallowed hard and typed a new reply. I'll be using my personal savings now. Call me if you need advice on budgeting. I smiled grimly as I hit send. That would sting. I gathered the ledger and returned to the bedroom. I tucked it back beneath the floorboard, then reached for my coat, the navy wool one I wore on my honeymoon 50 years ago. It still fit, though the sleeves had begun to fray at the cuffs. I slipped it on and gazed at myself in the mirror. My silver hair was neatly curled, and despite the lines on my face and the slight stoop in my shoulders, my eyes were bright and determined. I felt a spark inside me, an ember of hope that had lain dormant for far too long. I fetched my purse, counted out the car keys in my wallet, and paused. I considered calling the travel agency today, but the thought of handling this on my own filled me with both dread and excitement. I could do it. I shoved the purse strap over my shoulder and descended the stairs. I locked the door behind me and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cold air. The sky was gray and overcast, but to me it felt clear and unblemished, as if the world had reset for me. I walked to the corner bus stop, heart pounding as I waited for the number 12 that would take me downtown. Other commuters slipped on and off, wrapped in scarves and earbuds. I felt like a stranger among them, carrying the weight of the ledger beneath my coat. Yet I felt lighter than I had in years, buoyed by the knowledge that this journey was mine alone. The bus arrived with a squeal of brakes and doors opened. I climbed aboard and paid my fare, choosing a seat by the window. As we rumbled toward the city center, I stared out at the frost-lined streets, shops opening for the late morning rush. In my mind I ran through the steps. Arrive at Mariner Voyages, show my statements, wire funds, sign papers, walk out with a lifetime pass confirmation in hand. No more being left out of their parties, no more dining alone while they reveled without me. I would break free of their demands and live for myself. The bus slowed to a stop at the terminal. I stood and made my way down the aisle, ready for the next chapter. My heart beat faster, not with fear but with anticipation. As I stepped off and saw the spire of the Mariner Voyages building in the distance, I smiled. The ledger, my trust, and my resolve had carried me this far. Now it was time to transform sacrifice into adventure. And I would do it one confident step at a time. I stepped off the bus and felt a thrill I hadn't known in years. The Mariner Voyages office loomed ahead, a sleek glass facade that reflected the gray winter sky. I clutched my purse close, the weight of my leather binder, the Clarke Trust, safe inside, and squared my shoulders. This was it. Today I would transform every year of sacrifice into the freedom I deserved. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh brochures. A young woman behind the front desk looked up and smiled brightly. "Good morning. Welcome to Mariner Voyages. How can I help you?" I returned her smile and lifted my chin. "Good morning. I'd like to purchase the Endless Horizons Lifetime Pass." I withdrew my binder and laid it on the counter, opening to the page stamped with the latest total, $250,000, and the notation of my Silver Horizons Senior and Widow's Memorial discounts. The agent's eyebrows rose as she flipped through the pages. "You've been very diligent," she said. "Let me verify a few details." She scanned the ledger entries, then asked for matching bank statements. I handed her a slim stack of carefully photocopied pages, each stamped by my bank. She nodded in satisfaction and typed rapidly at her terminal. "Your net cost after discounts and loyalty credits is $202,500, she told me. "We can process a wire transfer today and you'll receive your confirmation by this afternoon, complete with your gold-foiled pass." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Thank you," I said, and watched as she printed an agreement. The paper felt surreal in my hands, an agreement that would change my life. Her pen hovered over the signature line. "And just to confirm," she said softly, "this is your personal savings, right? Nothing joint, correct?" I smiled. "My own. Every cent came from my late husband's pension and my tips, tracked carefully in this ledger." I tapped the binder. "It's all mine." She glanced at me with professional warmth. "Understood. I'll draft the wire request." We moved to a private desk where she escorted me to a terminal and helped me enter the transfer details. I double-checked the account number, paused over the Authorize Transfer button, and then clicked. A confirmation number flashed on the screen. She sighed with genuine delight. "Congratulations, Mrs. Clarke. You'll receive your digital pass within an hour. Welcome aboard our family of lifelong travelers." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back. "Thank you," I whispered. She handed me a certificate, my Endless Horizons Lifetime Pass, its edges trimmed in gold foil. My name was embossed beneath the company logo. Holding it felt like clutching the key to a long-locked door. I slipped the certificate and the binder back into my purse and rose. As I turned toward the door, the agent called after me, "Enjoy your travels, and Happy New Year from all of us at Mariner Voyages." I stepped back into the chilly air, clutching the promise of tomorrow. My children's texts no longer echoed in my mind. I had rewritten my story, from lonely stew and hurtful accusations to the vast blue horizon of possibility. My journey was underway. I was brushing the sleep from my eyes the morning after my cruise purchase when my phone buzzed insistently. I opened the message to find a formal email from an attorney representing my daughter and son. They alleged that the $202,500 I had just wired into Mariner Voyages was a family asset, not mine alone, and demanded an emergency injunction to freeze my checking account and seize our bungalow as collateral. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I refused to let panic take hold. I poured a cup of tea and settled at the kitchen table, placing my purse beside the ledger tucked beneath my chair. I reread the email. Procedural language, legal threats, the assertion that because I once used my credit card for joint household expenses their cruise funding was misappropriated. I rose and walked to the bookshelf where the land deed rested in a red folder stamped, Evelyn Clarke, sole owner. Next to it lay a stack of printed bank statements spanning 10 years, each deposit and withdrawal painstakingly annotated in my ledger. I carried the folder and statements back to the table, spread them out, and took a deep breath. This was the moment my years of quiet diligence would prove their worth. I dialed my attorney's number, a calm voice on the line within 3 rings. I explained the situation with precise clarity. My savings came from my late husband's pension checks and years of tips from my side jobs. These were documented assets in my sole name. The lawyer listened, then encouraged me to file an immediate response against their petition and obtain a hearing as soon as possible. I spent the morning drafting my affidavit while my attorney prepared the formal court documents. I described, under oath, every entry in the ledger that proved the provenance of my funds. The pension deposit dated March 15, 2010, the tip payouts on long shifts at O'Malley's, the overtime reimbursements from home visits. My affidavit also attached copies of the deed showing the bungalow was titled solely in my name. By midday, the court clerk confirmed an emergency hearing scheduled for 2 days later. It was fast, almost astonishingly so, but I felt ready. On the day of the hearing, I dressed in a navy blazer and comfortable slacks, an outfit that struck the balance between respect for the court and my desire to feel like myself. I tucked the ledger summaries into a manila folder and placed the deed prominently on top. My attendance was preceded by my attorney, who introduced the evidence package to the clerk. As I sat in the small courtroom, I watched my daughter and son enter with their own lawyer in tow. They looked haggard, perhaps realizing that the judge would review our evidence impartially. The hearing began with my children's lawyer presenting their argument, that the cruise purchase was sudden, an emotional reaction to being excluded, and that as joint beneficiaries of their late father's estate they were entitled to half of any substantial expenditure I made. The judge listened, his face unreadable. I felt a quiet resolve. When my attorney rose, he spoke calmly and directly. He pointed out that the estate had been fully settled within 6 months of my husband's passing, with an order awarding the bungalow and all pension assets to me as the surviving spouse. He presented the deed and the probate court order. He then presented my ledger, annotated bank statements, and a chart outlining every deposit source, pension versus service income. I watched the judge lean forward as he reviewed the ledger entries, nodding at the clarity of the evidence. When the judge invited me to speak, I rose. My heart fluttered, yet my voice was steady as I addressed him. I said, "Your Honor, I have worked every day since my husband died to support myself and to ensure our home remained paid for. I took on 2 jobs because I had to, not for luxuries. The Clarke Trust ledger demonstrates that these funds are entirely my own. My pension, my wages, my tips. I allowed my children to charge household expenses on my credit card, but I did so as a gesture of support, not so they could later claim ownership of these funds." I paused to let the gravity of the ledger entry settle. This cruise purchase was made with the money I earned and saved for my own security and dignity. It is not joint property. The judge asked my children's lawyer if he had any rebuttal to the estate documents and the ledger. He hesitated, then admitted there was no contest to the deed or the statements of account. My son shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge reviewed the probate ruling that had concluded nearly a decade earlier. The judge sighed. He reminded everyone that the law required clear proof of joint ownership to attach assets and that none had been provided. He commented gently on the spirit of family unity but reminded the courtroom that legal rights must be upheld regardless of personal feelings. When the judge pronounced his verdict, his words were measured. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds that the funds used to purchase the Endless Horizons Lifetime Pass are the sole property of the respondent, Evelyn Clarke. The petition to freeze her assets and seize the property is hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the petitioner is ordered to reimburse Mrs. Clarke for reasonable court costs. The judge's gavel fell lightly but firmly. Relief flooded through me. My children's lawyer slumped back into his chair, and I saw tears in my daughter's eyes. Perhaps regret, perhaps anger. The judge invited both sides to confer briefly on the reimbursement amount. My attorney and theirs spoke quietly. Then the judge finalized the cost award in my favor. As the courtroom cleared, my attorney patted my shoulder and said, "You were remarkable." Outside the courthouse, winter gusts nipped at my cheeks, but I felt light as air. I carried the folder of documents back to my car with a smile I could not suppress. Reporters snapped photos as I passed and one shouted, "Mrs. Clarke, any comment?" I paused, placed a hand on the car door and said, "Justice has been served. Happy New Year." Then I closed the door and drove home, envisioning the cruise ship waiting for me on the horizon. I woke the morning after the hearing with a flutter of excitement I hadn't felt in years. The sky was pale and overcast, but to me it looked like a fresh canvas. After breakfast and a quick review of yesterday's court transcript, I settled onto my sofa and dialed the number I'd saved for Myers Auctioneers. The voice at the other end was warm and professional. I introduced myself and explained that I owned the bungalow at 412 Elmwood Drive outright and wanted to arrange a public auction. The auctioneer listened attentively and asked me to email over the deed, the mortgage payoff statement, and a brief description of the property. I told him I'd deliver it in person. We agreed on a date 2 weeks hence so that we could get flyers printed, send postcards to local real estate agents, and allow word to spread among the neighborhood. I hung up and exhaled. This was the moment I had envisioned the night I hid the ledger beneath the floorboard. Now it was real. I made myself a cup of tea and stared into the swirl of steam. Selling the house felt like shedding a second skin. Walls that had sheltered me in my darkest hours would soon pass to someone else, and I would be left with the funds in my account and a world of options. My heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of sorrow. So much love and memory were embedded in that house. Yet those memories no longer bound me. Today they were launching me. Later that morning I dressed in sensible slacks and a crisp blouse. I printed copies of the deed and mortgage statement, plus a handwritten letter explaining how the home had belonged to me as the surviving spouse and sole owner. I tucked everything into a sturdy folder and slipped it into my bag. As I stepped onto my porch, the winter air felt sharp and invigorating. The sky was still pale, but clouds scudded across it as if the world itself was moving forward. I locked the door behind me, slid the key into my purse, and started the short walk to Myers' auctioneer's office, my steps light with resolve. The auctioneer's office was a converted loft with high ceilings and wide windows. I could almost imagine the cavernous auction hall where my house would be sold. He greeted me at the door and ushered me into a small conference room. He pored over the documents I offered, nodding with approval at the clear title and the tidy mortgage payoff. He asked me to describe the house's best features to include in the marketing materials. I spoke of the sunny breakfast nook, the hardwood floors refinished last spring, the new energy-efficient windows, the small but flourishing rose garden in the backyard. He jotted notes and promised a professional appraisal within 3 days. Walking home, I felt buoyed by each step. My phone vibrated with a text from the auctioneer's assistant. Appraiser will arrive Thursday at 10 a.m. I tapped back, "Thank you," and pressed the phone to my chest. Thursday already felt too far away. I wanted the bidding to start now. The next few days passed in a blur of rose pruning, window cleaning, and conversations with neighbors who eyed me curiously as I hung flyers on the community bulletin board. I realized I had never truly valued these neighbors' companionship. Bless their hearts when they smiled and waved. On Wednesday evening, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a glass of cider. I toasted the ledger beneath my pillow, the pillowcases I had stitched with tiny sailboat patterns, and the certificates of my cruise purchase framed in my mind. With each sip, I felt more certain that I had made the right choice. Thursday morning, the appraiser arrived in a crisp navy suit. He introduced himself as Mr. Barnes and carried a laser measuring device and a notebook. He walked through every room, clicking measurements, inspecting foundations, checking that the roof shingles were in good condition, even peeking behind the cabinetry in the bathroom. I stood by silently, offering him coffee and trying not to glance at my watch. By noon, he declared the house's fair market value at $250,000, which matched my payment for the cruise nearly to the dollar. We shook hands. It felt like the final piece clicking into place. Over the weekend, the auctioneer's team delivered postcards to 100 potential buyers and hung signs on every corner of Elmwood Drive. I watched from the porch as curious phone calls came in, requests for photos, emails asking about the zoning. My heart fluttered each time I heard my phone ring. On Monday, I met with the auctioneer again to review the reserve price and the terms. He recommended a 20% premium over appraisal to encourage competition, so we set the reserve at $300,000. The auctioneer's confidence was contagious. I signed the contract and gave him the keys to the house. It was bittersweet handing them over, but I did it with a steady hand. Auction day dawned bright and clear. A small team had set up folding chairs in the driveway and a long table with registration forms and refreshments. A photographer from the local paper snapped pictures for a story on widow turns heroine, sells home, buys freedom. Curious neighbors gathered behind the caution tape I'd asked the auctioneer to put up, craning their necks to catch a glimpse. My children did not appear. I waited in my car until the auctioneer called my name. I stood and swept my gaze across the crowd. Potential buyers, neighborhood onlookers, the press, and the auctioneer standing beside the podium. He tapped the microphone and began with a welcome. His voice carried easily in the cool air as he read from his notes about the property's history, the amenities, and the legal guarantees of clear title. My pulse raced as he called for the first bid at $100,000. A hand shot up from the back, a low murmur of voices followed, and soon bids climbed in increments of 10,000. I clenched and unclenched my fists, matching each bid to a mental calculation of funds. The bidding continued, 120, 130, 150. Each call drew gasps and applause. Then it crept above my target, 200, 250. My breath caught. 250 was my purchase price for the cruise. The next bid was 275, and then $300,000. The reserve was met. The auctioneer's voice rose. Do I hear 320? 320,000. I felt my chest tighten, the cold air turning crisp in my lungs. A wave of elation washed over me when the final bid of $330,000 rang out. Bidding slowed and then the hammer came down. The gavel struck wood twice, firmly and decisively. $330,000, sold to bidder number 37, the auctioneer announced. Applause erupted. I stepped forward as the successful bidder, a local developer, strode up to exchange contact information and shake my hand. He seemed pleasant enough, already planning to renovate and flip the house. I accepted his handshake and tucked the final check into my purse. I felt dizzy with triumph. Neighbors applauded, the photographer clicked away, and the auctioneer wrapped his arm around my shoulders in a congratulatory gesture that felt rarely offered to a woman of my age. I walked to my car, my legs shaky but proud. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was silver and my smile was radiant. I started the engine and drove home slowly, winding through the familiar streets one last time as owner of a new future. Reaching my driveway, I realized I did not need a key. In its place, I carried a check and a promise. The bungalow belonged to someone else now, but I held the proceeds in hand and freedom in my heart. I stepped out into the afternoon light and breathed deeply, the crisp air a reminder that life's horizon stretched wide and infinite. I locked the car and paused, gazing at the empty lot where my home once stood. The foundation glowed under the sun, a silent witness to my past sacrifices and present triumph. With the ledger safely tucked in my purse and the check in my wallet, I walked away from Elmwood Drive for the final time. Each step carried me farther from the weight of old obligations and closer toward the sea. In my mind's eye, I saw the ferry terminal, the line of suitcases waiting, and the hull of the endless horizons gleaming under tropical sun. My future was no longer tethered to mortgage payments or guilt-laden phone calls. It was charted by new adventures and the wide blue beyond. I turned onto the main road, one hand in my coat pocket and the ledger beneath my arm. Ahead lay new streets, new faces, and the promise of wind in my hair. I pressed down on the accelerator and the engine roared. As I drove toward the sunset, I whispered to myself, "Happy New Year, Evelyn. You did it." I woke before dawn on the day of my departure, my heart fluttering like a bird in a cage. The marketplace of Elmwood Drive was still silent, save for the soft hum of a street cleaner and the distant call of a morning bird. I dressed carefully, choosing a light cashmere sweater and linen trousers, comfortable, unpretentious clothes for a woman who was about to board a ship and leave her old life behind. I pinched my ledger into my purse and double-checked that the cruise pass and my identification were in the small folder I carried. I drove myself to the harbor, the road unfolding before me like a promise. The first glimpse of the endless horizons made my breath catch. A gleaming white vessel with ribbons of blue paint along its hull, its decks stacked like giant terraces rising toward the sky. A line of passengers and crew clustered on the dock, luggage in tow and cameras at the ready. I parked in the designated lot for cruise guests and took a slow, steadying breath. My hands trembled with anticipation as I stepped out of the car, my boots clicking on the pavement. My children were there, standing at the railing alongside a small crowd of onlookers. My daughter's cheeks were stained with tears, her arms wrapped around her brother's shoulders. Their eyes brightened or maybe flickered with surprise when they saw me. I could see guilt and regret battling in their expressions. My heart swelled with pity before shifting to a firm resolve. This was my moment. I approached with a gentle smile. "Good morning," I said. The wind whipped loose strands of silver hair around my face. The salty air felt like a benediction. My son stepped forward, voice cracking. "Mom." He looked uncertain, as though unsure whether to embrace me or run. My daughter's voice rattled as she added, "We're sorry." I studied their faces and nodded. "Thank you," I said. "But today is not about apologies. Today is about my future." I held out my hand. "Safe travels," I told them. Their hand clasp lingered a moment too long and I saw the tears in their eyes. But then I turned away, lifted my chin and stepped onto the gangway. A crewman greeted me by name and directed me to the check-in podium. I presented my golden foiled pass, and the clerk processed it with efficiency and warmth. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Clarke," he said, handing me a cabin key and a schedule of upcoming events. I tucked them into my purse and continued up the ramp, passing rows of polished brass rails, potted palms, and crew members in crisp uniforms. On Deck 3, I found the public lounge where a small buffet of fruit and coffee awaited early arrivals. Champagne glasses caught the dawn light like magic. I poured a glass of orange juice and wandered to a window overlooking the bow. The harbor receded behind us as engines rumbled to life. My pulse quickened. City skyline gave way to open water in a seamless blur of gray sea meeting pale morning sky. I raised my glass in a quiet toast to nobody in particular. The gentle rock of the ship beneath my feet felt like cradle lullaby. I closed my eyes and let memory drift to the beginning. The sting of that video call on New Year's Eve, the ledger beneath my pillow, the sting of my children's words. And then the breakthrough. The cruise booking, the court hearing, the auction, the check in my hand. All those moments had led here. And now it was time to live. When the first official announcement sounded, "All guests are invited to the bow deck at 9 for our blessings ceremony," I slipped my purse over my shoulder and made my way upstairs. The air was fresher there, tinged with spray. A dozen fellow passengers gathered near the rail, some clutching coffee mugs, others cameras. A crewwoman in white uniform stepped forward and held out a small framed birch placard with calligraphed words. "Freedom at Sea, January 2nd, 2025. She smiled at me. "Mrs. Clarke, please join us for the ceremony." I stepped onto the platform and faced the small crowd. The ship's chaplain, an elegantly robed woman, invited us to share why we chose a lifetime pass. A young couple spoke of their love story. A retired teacher spoke of dreams of ancient ruins. When the microphone reached me, my palms felt oddly dry. I held the mic and gazed at the endless water stretching before me. Words came steady and true. "I chose this ship because I spent my life caring for others. My husband, my children, my patients. Tonight I spent alone in my home while my children partied without me, asking for more money as if my love had no limit. Today I stand here to claim the love I owe myself, to seek adventure, friendship, and joy on these open seas." My voice wavered only once and I swallowed back emotion. This ship is my home now. These waves are my new family. The chaplain nodded and blessed the ceremony. A bottle of sparkling wine was cracked against the polished prow, a symbolic christening. The crowd applauded and a small child in the front row cheered. I felt tears slip down my cheeks, but they were tears of liberation. I smiled through them and raised a hand in gratitude. Guests slowly dispersed to explore the ship. The sun deck up above, the library to starboard, the observation lounge to port. I wandered upstairs, still dizzy with delight. I discovered my cabin at deck 7. A comfortable room with twin portholes, plush linens, and a balcony overlooking the water. The bed was made, the furniture arranged for optimal comfort. I set my purse on the dresser and moved to the balcony. The wind caught my hair and I leaned on the railing. The deck crew was lowering gangways at the stern to clear for our departure. Moments later a horn sounded, deep and resonant. It vibrated bone and spirit alike. I closed my eyes against the sun and felt the ship pull away from the pier. Elmwood Drive, the courthouse, the hotel lobby where my children had toasted each other without me, all faded into memory. Ahead lay turquoise seas, exotic ports, and laughter shared over new friendships. Later that afternoon the welcome aboard luncheon was served in the main dining hall. I chose a quiet corner table overlooking the sea, ordered a crisp salad and the chef's seafood bisque, and lifted a glass of white wine to my lips. The flavors were sublime, reminding me that I was worthy of fine things. A gentle knock at my table brought a server who delivered a small chocolate truffle, compliments of the captain. I savored it, savoring every moment. By evening the ship's entertainment crew had arranged a New Year's Day revival party. Ballroom dancing to a live trio, hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays. I ventured into the ballroom wearing a simple silk scarf and a smile. I watched dancers twirl under golden chandeliers and felt no envy. Instead I felt a thrill of possibility. On this ship I was neither widow nor caregiver nor bank for my children. I was simply Evelyn Clarke, adventurer. During the first waltz, a fellow passenger extended his hand. I hesitated for a moment, decades of shyness creeping in, then placed my hand in his. We glided across the floor beneath mirrored ceilings, wings of laughter and music carrying us. I glanced out the window at the edge of the world, where water and sky met in blue eternity. I glimpsed the reflection of my own face and I saw strength, softness, and a woman reborn. Later, I slipped back to my cabin and stood on the balcony under a canopy of stars. The moon shimmered on the waves. I wrapped a light blanket around my shoulders and closed my eyes, breathing the salty night air. I thought of my ledger resting at home, my bungalow long sold, my children left behind. I felt no regret. I felt peace. I whispered into the darkness, "Good night, Evelyn. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sail." The ship's gentle roll rocked me like a cradle. I headed inside and sank into the soft bed, cocooned in fresh linens. My dreams were filled with distant islands, laughter and horizons painted in sunrise. Tomorrow I would explore, discover, and claim this life I had earned. Tonight I rested in the certainty of my freedom, carried on endless oceans to the adventures yet to come.